Necessity, they say, is the mother of invention. The mass of wire, mud, trenches, and modern weaponry on the Western Front during World War I had led to an appallingly costly stalemate, where success was measured not in kilometers gained, but mere meters. But on the 8th of August, 1918, at the Battle of Amiens, on a single day, the Allied forces moved 13 kilometers across German-held territory. And on that day, the battlefield hummed with the sound of over 550 of what would prove to be perhaps the defining weapon of the war. Tanks.
When the British were designing the tank in 1915, 1916, they were aware of the nature of trench warfare on the Western Front. And the reason for this large track design in that lozenge shape of the first tanks was to give the tank mobility, so if it came to the trench lines, if they were able to break through, is that they'll be able to cross them without falling into a trench and getting irrevocably bogged.
The 28-ton rhomboid-shaped Mark I tank first saw service on the Somme on the 15th of September 1916 and was not a huge success. Mechanical problems from what proved to be an underpowered and unreliable 78-kilowatt engine and crews inexperienced in handling the new weapon compromised the performance of the few that made it to the battlefield. And they were slow.
It actually was slower than an infantryman walking, which meant that rather than being the tanks advancing and the troops coming behind the tanks, it often meant that the troops went far in advance of the tank, which found it hard to keep up.
Noise inside the tank made it difficult to communicate, and as a result, some became hopelessly lost. Others ground to a halt, their crews rendered unconscious by the fumes of the engine, which sat in the middle of the fighting compartment without any cover or muffler. And they were prone to bogging in the muddy morass that was the Western Front. But development persisted. Adjustments to each variation were made based on combat experience. In the Mark IV, power was up to 15 kilowatts. Weight was down to 25 tons. Speed increased to 6.5 kilometers an hour. Continuous improvements that by 1918 saw the tank entrenched as a vital cog in the machinery of war.
You think of the emergence of the tank on the battlefield in the First World War. It's clunky, it's unreliable, the armour's perhaps penetrated by rifle or machine gun fire, but nonetheless it's this lumbering, terrifying beast of war you've never seen before. It has an immense psychological impact. And it becomes tactically very significant. As a soft, squishy infantryman with a rifle, you are absolutely outclassed by this giant land ship. And that remains true for decades.
And within just 2 of those decades, tank warfare reached its zenith with the outbreak of World War II and the famous German Blitzkrieg tactics of 1939. A highly mobile and destructive all-arms method of fighting, led by the famous Panzer tanks. Blitzkrieg reshaped the battlefield, where previously emphasis had been on a smattering of light tanks and infantry support roles. The Allies now desperately needed medium tanks that could compete with and defeat the German panzers. But in tank design, the British had fallen well behind the game.
The British in 1918, it can fairly be said, were probably the leaders in tank design. However, the belief that tanks would be useful in European war, but probably not in the colonial warfare which the British find themselves doing in the interwar period, meant that they did not spend as much time looking at tank design as they did until probably late in the 1930s.
Outclassed and with limited time and limited resources, they turned to the Americans for salvation. They responded with the M4 Sherman. the most widely used tank by the Western Allies during the war. The design brief was simple: a medium tank with a 75mm main gun mounted in a full traverse turret. Fast enough to keep pace with the German tanks, with good all-round visibility and improved armor allocation, and it was needed almost immediately. To save time, the Americans incorporated the engine, transmission, tracks, and suspension systems of the M3 Lee medium tank. On that existing chassis, they put an all-new body with frontal armor that was not a patchwork of riveted plates, but a solid piece of cast homogeneous steel 50mm thick. To overcome the strength disadvantage of cast armor, the front armor plate was cleverly sloped to 56 degrees, creating a surface that would cause some incoming rounds to glance off. But more importantly, it increased the effective thickness of the armor on the horizontal plane to 91mm, almost doubling protection. Even so, against the heaviest of tanks, the Sherman was vulnerable.
Crews putting extra track on the front of their vehicles, they're putting extra sandbags on the front of the vehicles, and this is trying to retard an incoming armor-piercing round. Sometimes not to great effect.
Weighing close to 30 tons, the Sherman had a top speed of 40 kilometers per hour, meaning it could keep pace with its principal foe, the Panzer. And armed with a medium-velocity 75mm main gun, 2 anti-infantry machine guns, and a 50 caliber Browning anti-aircraft gun, they had the Panzer covered. But the Sherman's greatest strengths were its reliability and its numbers. Nearly 5,000 were produced, built by the giants of the American motor industry: Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors.
That whole Henry Ford type thing, the production line of cars, now applies to making a tank.
The Sherman's life was extended, seeing combat in numerous Cold War conflicts. But as anti-tank weaponry improved and the speed of warfare increased, the need arose for battlefield behemoths that were simply bigger and faster. And there are none bigger than the tank they call Whispering Death. The Cold War fueled an environment which led to the development of some of the most advanced weapon systems on the planet. And when in the 1970s, the US Army decided they needed a faster tank with exceptional firepower and unprecedented levels of crew protection, they took the best of the world's available military technology and created the M1 Abrams. Learning lessons from a variety of conflicts, they designed a tank that, despite weighing up to 70 tons in some variants, has a deceptively low profile. Standing less than 3 meters tall, the low height makes the Abrams a less obvious and less available target for enemy fire. Significant work has also been done to reduce the thermal signature of the tank, making it harder to detect. But if it is hit, it is constructed using the most advanced armor available.
The protection system of the M1 Abrams is fairly superior compared to a lot of main battle tanks. And certain variants of the M1 Abrams actually use depleted uranium in the turret. Now, depleted uranium is a very dense material, and that means it's able to provide superior levels of protection against a whole range of weapon systems.
It was also the first tank to use the British-developed Chobham armor, a complex laminate structure that combines an arrangement of ceramic blocks, metal plates, Kevlar, and open space to achieve a near-perfect blend of anti-penetration surfaces. In battle, the Abrams' 120mm smoothbore main gun has been found to outrange any other tank in current service. and connected to the world's most advanced tank-based targeting system that monitors the tank's tilt, motion, and even the wind. It allows the Abrams to fire on multiple targets with accuracy while on the move. But what truly sets the Abrams apart is its speed, which can exceed 70 kilometers per hour. To achieve this, it uses a distinctive power source.
The use of the gas turbine engine in the M1 Abrams is fairly unique to main battle tanks. And the reason why they use a gas turbine is simply to reduce the noise and to give it the power it needs to accelerate such a heavy vehicle. This vehicle weighs up to 70 tons with certain variants, and so it's a very heavy piece of military equipment, and you need a substantial means of driving that forward.
It is the whisper-quiet gas turbine that has given the M1 its nickname. A power source that is normally associated with a very different kind of battlefield behemoth: aircraft.